Alrighty, welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining to this new, we'll see how new, the Wednesday night instead of the Thursday night class. We'll continue this to see how it works out. By the way, if anybody does prefer the Thursday night over the Wednesday night, please do let me know. I always thought Thursday night was like a crazy night to do it, but it worked for like many years. So in any case, if anybody wants to join us Wednesday nights at 9 p.m., we give the Zoom class. Everyone's welcome to join. And if not, you're also welcome not to join, I guess. But if you do want to join, you can reach out to me at rabbizitron@torahanytime.com, and I could add you to the WhatsApp group, which I'm trying to just put it, instead of like sharing it in so many different places, I'm trying to minimize all the sharing in all the different WhatsApp groups. So just trying to post it just on the one group. But okay, let us begin. Big stuff tonight. Big stuff. I'll tell you why these classes are so amazing to me. It might not be amazing to like other people, but I'll tell you why it's amazing to me. Because when you start figuring out the psychology behind the person, behind the question, behind the topic, you learn so much about it and you can better understand it. When we look into our own lives, the way that we shape ourselves and the way that we become who we become is based off our upbringing, our surroundings, our interactions, our friends. We have so many different things that connect us, that sort of connect the dots in our brain to become who we end up becoming. So imagine you're able to the sad thing and the unfortunate thing is that we don't do the psychological, focus on ourselves because it is difficult. It's difficult to do it on somebody else, but it's definitely difficult to do it on you. But imagine you could figure out why you are the way that you are. Now, I know that's a statement that's generally said in a negative way, that why are you the way that you are? But in essence, it really tells us of who we are deep inside and what is our issues, what is our problems, how do we fix it. Therapy delves into that. So when we're going into the historical background of people, it gives us a psychological understanding of the surroundings, because we're all very influenced by our surroundings. Whether we want to admit it or not, we are very influenced, whether it's the secular surroundings, whether it's the religious surroundings, whether it's our upbringing in the schools and the friends and our spouses and our children and our neighbors. Everything affects us of who we become and how we interact. So when looking into Shimon HaTzadik, we spoke last week on Alexander the Great, who lived during this time, and that's why we spoke about him during that time. We will give a small recap on Alexander the Great, but not right now. We'll give that recap a little bit later. So the second Beis Hamikdash was initially under the rule of the Persian Empire. In fact, for the first 34 years, right? So after the Purim story, for the first 34 years of the Beis Hamikdash, it was under the Persian Empire. After the 34 years, Alexander the Great started his conquest, which lasted about 6 years, where he took over the Persian Empire, and this is where the Greek Empire took control over Eretz Yisrael as well. So during this 70-year break between the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash and the building of the second Beis Hamikdash, a lot of the Jewish people they left Israel, whether it's by their own choice or by forcefully leaving. They were gone, and many people went to Babylon. The second Beis Hamikdash, when it was rebuilt, so Ezra. And when Ezra came to Eretz Yisrael, this was the point. Until this time, the Eretz Yisrael was desolate of Torah study for many decades. The Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. The Babylonians, they conquered besides destroying Eretz Yisrael, they also conquered Eretz Yisrael. And then you had the Persian Empire that took over the Babylonian Empire. And now you have the Greek Empire that took over the Persian Empire, who took over the Babylonian Empire. So now, you have over here the land of Eretz Yisrael, which has gone through quite a lot over the past 70 years and changed over a lot of hands. And Torah study was more focused in Bavel during this time, or in Persia, and now it's coming back to Eretz Yisrael. And this is where Ezra comes into the picture. So Ezra, the Chachamim tell us that Ezra sort of revitalized Torah in Eretz Yisrael. He was responsible for spreading Torah throughout the entire land of Israel, and to the level of where Ezra was. Chazal, the Chachamim tell us that if Moshe Rabbeinu had not preceded Ezra, the Torah would have been received from Ezra would have received the Torah from Hashem. That's how much of a high level that he was. So Ezra, just give you a little bit of background, and you soon see why I'm giving you a little bit of a background of Ezra. Ezra was the one who formed the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. Anshe Knesset HaGedolah was 120 sages. Many of them were prophets who, governed a lot of the Jewish law, and one of the example is they put together the Shimon HaTzadik. That this is through divine inspiration, through Ruach HaKodesh, and they kind of held the fort together, so to speak. Now Ezra, the ruler, if you want to say, of the Jewish people at the time, his student was Shimon HaTzadik, who we're speaking about tonight. Now, Shimon HaTzadik is very interesting because I was looking for it. I'm like, why is his name Tzadik? We know Yosef HaTzadik. We know there's a few people throughout the Jewish history that have the name Shimon HaTzadik. And I was looking and I couldn't find a reason of why specific. Well, I did find a reason I was going to say, but I couldn't find Yosef HaTzadik. He's known as a tzaddik because he was very much focused on the midah of Yesod, on Shmiras HaBris and Shmiras, and he was very focused on, and that made him a level of a tzaddik. And we have throughout history very, very select few of the Jewish people that are known by the name tzaddik. Shimon HaTzadik was known by this. The Magen Avos brings down, and he in fact says that it's not explained why Shimon HaTzadik is named Tzadik, more so than the other Tanaim, right? He lived in the time of the Tanaim. They were all righteous. Why was he better than anybody else? So the Magen Avos goes and says that the whole nation, the reason why they called him Tzadik is because he was more righteous than anybody else, meaning that he was on a level above everybody else, which, again, I have a question. This is only my question. You have Gedolim, which also are a level above everybody else, and we still, of course, we refer to them as tzaddikim, but the Gedolim, they're not, their name is not like, Rav Chaim Kanievsky HaTzadik, even though he was a tzaddik. You don't see Chacham Avad Yosef HaTzadik, even though he was a tzaddik. So, these people were giants in our generation. These are people that are more righteous than everybody else, but the Magen Avos does say that the level, and it must be that the level of where Shimon HaTzadik was at this point in time was so much higher than everyone else. Now, Shimon HaTzadik, he studied under Ezra, like we said, he was a student of Ezra, Nehemiah, also of the Nevi'im, Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi. And it's very interesting, we'll soon see where it comes into play, that Shimon HaTzadik lived in a very critical point in Jewish history. Shimon HaTzadik lived in the time where the prophecy stopped happening. His leadership coincided with the death of the last prophet, which was Malachi. So he was in a time where there were prophets, and then there were no longer prophets. That is a huge change, and we'll soon see how it comes into play, and what Alexander the Great has to do with all of this, and what Shimon HaTzadik focus has been during this time. Now, at this point in time in Jewish history, the Av Beis Din was the leading halachic authority. The Kohen Gadol was the political leader. This stayed under the power of the Kohen Gadol until it was misused, and then it was moved to the Nazir. But at this point in time, the Kohen Gadol, which was Shimon HaTzadik, he was the political leader, and he was a Kohen Gadol for 40 years. Now that may seem okay, like he served his term for 40 years. We don't understand how impressive that is during the time of the second Beis HaMikdash. Just to give you an understanding, the first Beis HaMikdash stood for a total of 410 years. During that period of 410 years, only 12 Kohanim Gedolim officiated. There was only 12 high priests during that time. The second Beis HaMikdash, which stood for 10 years longer than the first, which stood for a total of 420 years, had over 300 Kohanim Gadolim. It had over 300 high priests. When you subtract, or you do a little simple calculation, you subtract the 40 years of Shimon HaTzadik, because he was in I guess you call it in power for 40 years. And you subtract the 80 years of Yochanan Kohen Gadol, and the 10 years of Rabbi Yishmael ben Papi, and the 11 years of Rabbi Elazar. These are all the Kohanim. That means that the remainder of the 300, they didn't even last a year in office. And that's how the changeover was. Which means, one of the many things, but one of the things that it means is that the way that the spiritual level of the Jewish people during the time of the second Beis HaMikdash was nowhere close to where it was during the first Beis HaMikdash. So now you have over here a Kohen Gadol, a very righteous Kohen Gadol. His name is literally the righteous, HaTzadik. And you would think that it would be the Mishnayos, would be flooded with his information, with his teachings. But surprisingly, or not surprisingly, there is only one single statement noted by Shimon HaTzadik. There's not, and it wasn't an halachic ruling. There's not one halachic ruling or legal statement that was recorded by the name of Shimon HaTzadik. The only thing that was recorded in Shimon HaTzadik is the second parak in Perkei Avos, which states Shimon HaTzadik haya mishiarei Knesset HaGedela. Shimon HaTzadik was from the remnants, from the remainder of the Anshe Knesset HaGedela. Rabbi Victor Miller says that he wasn't actually part of the Anshe Knesset HaGedela, but he was during that time. But whatever it was, he lived during that time. And he used to say, Al Shloisha Dvarim Ha'olam Ha'amid. His big statement in the Torah Shabbat Peh is that Shimon HaTzadik used to say three things. And that is the world stands, the world stands on three things. What are the three things? Ala Torah study, Vala Avodah, which literally is meant to be for the Avodas in the Beis HaMikdash, but now it's translated into prayer because we don't have the Beis HaMikdash. And the third thing is Al Gemilas Chasadim Ein, doing kindness. This is the big statement that we have from the Shimon HaTzadik. Now we have to break this down, and that's what we're going to be doing over the course of the next classes. Whenever we continue the series, we have the high holidays coming up, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, but the focus is going to be to try to break down of what Shimon HaTzadik, the one of the few people that have the title Tzaddik in the name, why is it that he focused on these things, and what does it mean that the world stands on these three things? So now, during this time when Shimon HaTzadik was Kohen Gadol, this is during the beginning of the second Beis HaMikdash, the people were generally on a high level. And we have to really understand, I'm really trying to build a picture of where the people stood. Because the more that you understand the background of who Shimon HaTzadik was, what was the situation, who was the people, the more you can understand the lessons that come out. So there's a Gemara in Nedarim, page 9b, that tells over a story about Shimon HaTzadik's practice regarding to refraining, not eating from the meat offering that was brought by a Nazir. So a Nazir is someone who decides to take upon themselves to live a very, very holy lifestyle. The example would be they won't drink wine. One of the things is that they don't drink wine. They don't cut their hair. They don't come into close contact with a dead person. Nowadays, we don't. We don't pursue this path, even though sometimes you see people that do. But the general population is, and the general consensus is that we do not go through the Nazirus. But a Nazir has to go through they sort of take a vow upon themselves of a holy lifestyle. And if they violate that, or let's say, for example, they become tamei, they become impure by being in contact with a human corpse, with a dead body. Now, they violated their term of Nazirus, so what they have to do is they have to bring a special offering, a special carbon, and then they have to start the Nazirus all over again, sort of like Etchesketz, they have to start again all the way from the beginning. Now, the Kohen Gadol which at the time, which was Shimon HaTzadik, he felt that the hardship of the extra days of Nazirus might cause a person to regret becoming a Nazir. Meaning that, you know how you're like, okay, I'm going to go on a diet for like 30 days. And if I mess up, I'm going to start again. And then you go on the diet for like 15 days. Yeah, you're halfway there. And then you make a mistake and you're like, oh my gosh, now I have to start again from the full, 30 days. You might regret the whole, I won't say a vow, but this whole decision that you made that you're going to go 30 days of like eating clean, let's say. So Shimon HaTzadik was nervous, was that maybe what would happen would be is that a Nazir would make a vow that he's going to be a Nazir for X amount of time, and then he is going to accidentally or whatever it is become impure through contact of a human corpse, a dead body, and now he has to start it over again. But maybe he is going to regret just going through this from the beginning. And if he starts regretting it, it's going to provide a basis for the annulment of the vow, of Nazirus, retroactively disqualifying his offering to some degree. So Shimon HaTzadik would refrain from eating this meat of the carbon for that reason, except for one time. The Gemara in Nedarim brings of only one time where he ate this carbon that came from a Nazir. And that was where, the Brisa states the story, where a Nazir came from the south, and he was a very beautiful person. He had beautiful eyes, beautiful hair, and he came with a carbon. He had to bring a carbon, and he goes over, Shimon HaTzadik goes over, the Kohen Gadol goes over to this Nazir, and he says, my son, why did you fit to destroy your beautiful hair of yours? Because a Nazir, what they have to do after they grow the hair long, they have to cut off all their hair at the end of the term of the Nazirus. So this Nazir responds and he says, I was a shepherd for my father in my town, and I went to fill up a pail of water, and if the water is very still, there is a reflection. And he said, I looked down into the water and I saw my reflection in the water, and he was a very good looking guy, and he said, my evil inclination came over me, and they wanted to remove me from Olam Haba, from the world to come. How would the evil inclination remove him from the world to come? The evil inclination tried to urge him, entice him to go and use his handsome appearance for sinful purposes. So I responded to the evil inclination, to the Yetzer Hara. I said, Russia, wicked one, why do you pride yourself with a word that's not yours? He's talking to himself. He says, what's going to happen to me after 120? I'm going to be consumed by worms and maggots. So he goes right then and there. He says, I swear, I make a vow that I will shave my hair for the sake of heaven. I'm not going to use my beauty for sinful purposes. So Shimon HaTzadik hears this. He stood up and he kissed this Nazir on the head, and he said, my son, may there be more people like you undertaking the vow of Naziris, because he saw how real and how true this Nazir was. It's interesting that the Ramami Pano brings down in his Sefer of Gilgulim that the reincarnation, that this Nazir was actually a reincarnation of Avshalom. Avshalom was the David HaMelech's son, who was also a Nazir, and his hair was a cause of his downfall. We're not going to go into the long story of it, but the Ramam Pano says that this man who came back as a Nazir was a Gilgal, was a reincarnation of none other than Avshalom, the son of King David. So, says Rabbi Victor Miller, that we see over here that if you have a simple person who worked the land, he was a shepherd, and you see the level of where he reached, of where he understood schar va'inish, where that he understood punishment and reward, and where he understood that the tactics of the Yetzer Hara, you could see of how good of a job Shimon HaTzadik accomplished in spreading Torah throughout the entire Eretz Yisrael. So we see the level that the Jewish people, were on during this time. And in fact, you even see it in the miracles that happened during the time that Shimon HaTzadik was the Kohen Gadol. So Shimon HaTzadik, just to backtrack a little bit, during the first Beis HaMikdash, there was so many open miracles in the Beis HaMikdash and during that time. Besides the fact that you had prophecy, you had nevuah, you had the Aron, you had a lot of things that were like above and beyond that didn't happen to a certain extent in the second Beis HaMikdash. So even though the miracles in the second Beis HaMikdash were not as great as it was in the first Beis HaMikdash, but during the time of Shimon HaTzadik, there was some special miracles that after he died only happened some of the time. And the Gemara tells us, the Gemara in Yuma, page 39.8, goes and tells us a list of all the things that happened during the time where Shimon HaTzadik, just to show you of how much of a high level that he was, that there were miracles that were happening during his 40 year of serving as Kohen Gadol in the Beis HaMikdash that stopped happening to a certain extent after he was a nifter. So, of these miracles, one of them were that on Yom Kippur there are two lots that were drawn. There was two identical goats. One was brought as a sin offering to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which would bear the sin of the Jews, and it would send to the Azazel. We're not going to get to all the details of it. So what the miracle that happened was that it was a lot. There was a lot, the Gadol, that every year when Shimon HaTzadik was picking the lots, the right hand would always have the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu would always be on the right hand. Consistently, like usually if you flip a coin, you have two options, you have 50%, but this was every single time, it always would go on the right hand. Another miracle was that the on the goat that was thrown off the cliff, there was a red string that was tied, half of the string was tied on the goat at horns, and half of it was tied onto the entrance of the Beis HaMikdash, and when and it was a red, and when it was thrown off, it turned into white. This is a sign that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has forgiven the averos, the sins of the Jewish people. So the miracle was that even on the goat, on the Beis HaMikdash, you had a string that miraculously was one color and 1 second and turned another color on another second. Another miracle was that the westernmost light of the menorah would burn continuously, even though there was not enough oil. There was only enough oil to last through the night, but it would just continue burning. Another miracle was on the Mizbeach. The fire was they only needed to add 2 sticks of wood, which is on the Mizbeach, which is something that was required by the Torah as a mitzvah. And the fire always kept on burning. And now anybody that just listens to us and they're a city boy or a city girl are like, okay, well, what does that mean, Eddie? But anybody who has been into a fire and had to fed a bonfire knows that the fire burns fairly quickly. Imagine having a fire consistently burn with only 2 pieces of wood being thrown there on a daily basis. So this was a very big nace, a very big miracle. Another miracle was the lechem hapanim. The lechem hapanim, it was blessed that if you eat a small amount, it would satisfy. Talk about like a diet pill, lahavdil, alfe, elfe, al-dullis. We can't even begin to that. But imagine that you eat a little tiny piece of the bread and you're satisfied. Now, these may appear small or insignificant, but these were consistent. These were consistent miracles, which means that it almost turned into this is natural thing. And this only happened during the time of when Shimon HaTzadik was alive. After he died, it only happened occasionally, which shows that it corresponds. The way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu treats us is the level that we are on. The Gemara says something fascinating on the last Yom Kippur of Shimon HaTzadik's life. He mentioned to those people around him that this year he was going to die. And they responded to him, how do you know that this year you're going to die? So he says, every Yom Kippur, he enters the Kodesh HaKodashim, and he's met by this old man. And this old man is dressed in white, and he enters the Kodesh HaKodashim with me, and he exits the Kodesh HaKodashim with me. This year, I saw this man was not dressed in white. He was dressed in black, and he only entered with me, and he didn't exit with me. And really, what ended up happening is after Sukkot, shortly after Yom Kippur, after Sukkot, Shimon HaTzadik became sick and he died and he passed away. His death, this marked the end of a very, very special era in Jewish history. And in fact, until then, the Kohanim, when they're saying Birkas Kahanim, they would use the Shem HaMefarish. And after that, after his death, they no longer did this. So to show you of what type of a level that he was on, where miracles were happening consistently, even though there was no more nevuah, there was no prophecy, there were still consistent miracles. And once he passed away, a lot of these things went away, which means there's a very simple equation that if you see something happen when he's around and it doesn't happen, you could attribute it that it was in his merit. To finish off this idea of how much of a high level he was on, there was a poet, a writer by the name of Ben Sira, and he lived during the time of Shimon HaTzadik, and he composed a very lengthy song describing Shimon HaTzadik in glowing terms. He was the greatest of his brothers, how glorious he was when he left the temple, the star shining from the God. It's a full piyut, and this is actually a very famous piyut that most of you would probably know it, but I don't know if you knew that it was attributed to Shimon HaTzadik, and this is the famous piyut of piyut is the prayer that we say, and this is actually on Yom Kippur, on the Chazan's repetition in the Musaf of Yom Kippur. We sing this famous song called Mare Kayin. Mare Kayin. This was named, and this is all done after Shimon HaTzadik. Happens to be that Mare Kayin is one of my brother's favorite song. It was actually played during his wedding. I've never been to a wedding where they played a song from the Yom Kippur davening, but it was played during my brother's wedding. A very, very famous, a song that I'm sure everybody is well aware of. Just to show you of what type of a level that he was on. So we see that the Jewish people were on a very high, they had a high level ruler, they were on a high level, but at the same point in time, just to continue painting this picture, it was still a little bit of a difficult time, and during this time, there was the Kutim, which we spoke about last week, that this is during the Assyrian Empire. They, scrambled all the people to prevent a rebellion. We're not going to go into that because we spoke about it in length, last time. But there was a certain Kuti leader that he was in Israel, and his name was Sanvelet. And this leader, he was an enemy of the Jewish people, and he went over to Alexander the Great, and he asked Alexander the Great, can I construct a temple? It wasn't a temple to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it was, a different type of temple. He wanted to put a temple on Har Gerizim, on Mount Gerizim. And Alexander the Great allowed him. And this son, Velet, he had under his wing a prominent Kohan, the son of Yoyada, and unfortunately, this Kohen had assimilated during this time, and he married Sanvelet's daughter. And there were a bunch of Jews that were loyal to this Kohen and Sanvelet, and they went along, with him. And in fact, the Sefer of Ezra and Nehemiah, they speak about assimilation during this time, and occurred during this lifetime, where Jewish men unfortunately married, Gentile woman. The Sefer of Ezra actually lists them by name. There were 112 of them. And while they were successful in getting them back, meaning bringing them back to the Jewish fold, you think about it, be like, okay, 112 people assimilating. In the big picture of things, you look at it, nowadays and age, where we have over 50% assimilation rate. Unfortunately, what's the big deal of 112? Very small number. So back then, any Jew that intermarried was a huge outrage. It was like a huge thing. There was a huge difference over here, and in fact, they were able to combat it so much that they were able to prevent, even after the fact, they were able to bring them all to the majority, not all of them, the majority. And they were able to bring them all back. So you have at this point there was a division beginning. And a division starting to happen, where the Jewish people kind of split into two groups: those loyal to Shimon HaTzadik and his student, we'll soon see Antigonus, and the students that come after that. And then you have the other group that were following Sanvelet. They were following this Kuti and this Kohanim, and going on Har Gerizim. So this unfortunately began an era of assimilation. And it continued with the Tzadukim, which we'll soon see in the coming classes. These, Tzaddik and Batius, which later ended up becoming priests in this temple. Which is spoiler alert. That's for a later class. This Har Gerizim, this temple that stood Har Gerizim, stood for approximately 200 years until the story of Hanukkah, where the Hashmonaim, they were able to overthrow the Greek presence in Eretz Yisrael. So here we have where the Jewish people in the land of Israel, while they were strong, there was a weakening aspect. There was assimilation, and there was Greek infiltration in the mindset. Now, to understand what the Greek infiltration was, this is the class we spoke about last week, but I'm going to give a very brief recap now, just so you can understand where the Jews stand compared to where the Greeks stand, and how the Greeks' mindset is slowly infiltrating into the Jewish mindset. So, the reason why we went into understanding Alexander the Great, because he was the ruler, and the ruler was a dictator at that time, and whatever his mindset was pushed very heavily on everybody else's mindset. So you look at Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was a son of King Philip, who was able to conquer what 500 years prior to this king couldn't conquer. Greece, until this point in time, were a bunch of cities that each one was fighting against the other. For 500 years, they couldn't figure it out. Comes King Philip, and he was able to conquer it all. So you could imagine the ego that was going on in the palace of King Philip. He was able to do what all his predecessors could not do. So this is what Alexander grew up in. And to make the ego injection much stronger, when Alexander was 13, he was able to tame and ride a horse, Bucephalus, that nobody was able to do. So at 13, he's hearing, until this age, he's hearing about all the ego, if the king's ego is not enough, and how much even more so on how much he was able to accomplish. Now you have this 13-year-old kid who is able to do something that nobody else was able to do. And to make matters even worse or better, depending on which angle you're looking at on his ego, when he was 20 years old, he took over as king because his father was assassinated. And there was a city that rebelled, the city of Thebes. He killed out the entire city, and nobody, rebelled, against him. So he is at 20 years old. He's coming from a very, very high egotistical place that I'm able to accomplish a lot. And to add fire to that, the Persian Empire at this point in time was ruling the entire world. This is right after the story of Hanukkah. They were ruling the entire world. This is after Ahasuerus, this is during the time of Darius, and they were ruling the entire world. Alexander the Great was able to beat the Persian Empire, and now he became the ruler of the entire, world at that point in time. And this is what the story that we spoke about last week, which was the Gemara in Tamid, which speaks where Alexander goes over to the Chachamim, and he starts asking them a whole list of questions. Ezra a Chacham, who's a wise man? Ezra a Usher, who's a wealthy man? Ezra a Gibor, who's a strong man? And we discussed the reason why Alexander the Great was asking this is Alexander the Great at this point in time, he's king, not only king, he's God in his eyes, right? He accomplished what nobody was able to accomplish. He is unstoppable in his eyes. You're talking about a champion that thinks everything about himself to the highest level possible. He goes over to the sages, the smartest people during that time, and he's fishing for compliments. You can see how much, he got plenty of compliments, but he still wanted to get more compliments. He goes over to the sage and he says, "Oh, who is a wise man?" He's waiting. Of course, you, Alexander the Great, last name of the Great. It's got to be you. It's got to be you. Why? Because you learned under Aristotle. And maybe, by the way, just a mindset, Alexander the Great lived during the time of Shimon HaTzadik. Alexander the Great, I don't know who gave him the name of the Great, but maybe it was himself, maybe it wasn't. Shimon HaTzadik also has a name of the righteous person. And maybe there is a connection during this time of why these two people had the battling of the spirituality and battling of the opposite of spirituality. Each had a different title of what their focus was. If you want to be great or you want to be a tzaddik. For maybe a point that maybe we'll discuss later, maybe we won't, I don't know. But in any case, Alexander the Great is coming, and he is fishing for compliments from the Chachamim. And the sage says, "Oh, you think you're wise? No, a wise person is a wise another. Knows why they were put in this earth. They know they're able to foresee the future. It has nothing to do with your wisdom from Aristotle. It has nothing to do with all your philosophical understanding and debates and scientific advancements. Has nothing to do with that." So he says, "Ezra Gibor, come on, you can't deny the fact that Alexander the Great conquered the entire world. It's got to be like, okay, who is a strong man? You got to say Alexander the Great. There's nobody he couldn't conquer. There's nobody that he couldn't accomplish." And they said, "No, has nothing to do with you. Ezra Gibor Kavish is Ezra. You want to know who's someone who's strong? What, might doesn't mean anything on how strong you are. If you're able to overcome your desires, that's what makes you strong. And then finally he says, Ezu Asher, he conquered the Persian Empire. Ahasuerus is known for his wealth. He conquered, he got all that wealth. He was extremely, extremely wealthy. The wealthiest person on that time, during that time period. So of course he would say to you, it says, no, Ezu Asher Samer Behalka, someone who's happy with what he had. Alexander the Great obviously wasn't happy with what he had. He had this insatiable appetite. He was always conquering more. He was always trying to accomplish more. So what was the mindset of Alexander the Great? Alexander the Great was coming to the sages. He was coming to the Torah sages saying, look at what I accomplished. I accomplish everything. I accomplish all these aspects. And the sages says, no. You ain't accomplished. That doesn't define wisdom. That doesn't define strength. That doesn't define wealth. Now we said, just to take on this point, we're going to go a little bit of a detour, we'll come back to it, a beautiful connection. Shimon HaTzadik, when he lived during this time, we said that there is no more prophecy. What that meant is that when there was prophets, you were able to go to a Navi, you were able to go to a prophet and say, I have this question, what should I do? The Navi just spills out the answer of what God said, and you have the answer stamped in gold. Like there's nothing more higher that you could take. You have the answer. There was no question. If you realize, until the time when there was Nevuah, there was no machlokas. You want to know why Shimon HaTzadik only had one statement? There was no machlokas. Everybody knew exactly what they needed to do, because if they didn't, they went to the Navi and they gave them a straight answer. But what happened now, after the time of when Nevuah finished, there's no more prophecy. Now it depends on the intellect of the Chachamim. How are you going to go and interpret the Torah in this particular instance? How are you going to paskin in this question? There's no Nevuah. You can't ask Kadosh Baruch Hu. So you have to understand the Torah. You have to understand the basis of interpreting the Torah. You have to understand the basis of the situation. And you have to come to a conclusion. Again, and this can be two different opinions. Could come from different angles. Each one have supporting views. So at this point, during the time of Shimon HaTzadik, now it's all about the intellect of the sages and how smart and how you're able to go and break down the Torah, and how you're able to understand it and how you're able to interpret it. At the same point in time, Alexander the Great comes out with his philosophy, the Greek philosophy. It's all about the intellect. He learned under Aristotle. He was very philosophical. He was very logical. Everything had to be very, very absolute. Anything that was not absolute, he rejected. So you have over here, at this point in time, two very, very powerful thought processes that were going around. They were both, you had the Greek system, which is man-made, obviously, and which didn't last. And then you have the Torah system, which was divine man. But both emphasize on the importance of human thought. This is the importance of how you're going to go and how you're going to analyze, how you're going to answer this question. So we have over here something very fascinating. You have over here Shimon HaTzadik's mindset from the spiritual side. You have over here Alexander the Great's mindset that infiltrated the Greek philosophy on the physical side. And what was the Greek philosophy? The Greek philosophy was, oh, you know what? I am so strong. I was able to accomplish so much. I am so wise because I learned under Aristotle the Great. I am so wealthy because I have so much money. And the mindset behind that is you want to accomplish a lot, be strong, be wealthy, study a lot and be wise. That's how you're going to accomplish a lot. So the pushing from the physical side, from Alexander the Great side, was it all depends on what I'm able to do. If I'm able to go and learn a lot, if I'm able to be strong, if I'm able to go and acquire a lot of wealth, and that is the focus, and that is what the world stands on. Comes the Chachamim, and they respond to Shimon HaTzadik, says, no. He says, you think wisdom? That has nothing to do with wisdom. You didn't know what's hanayla. You think you're wealthy? You're not satisfied with what you have. You think you're strong? You're not able to overcome your desire. So what does Shimon HaTzadik say? You know what the world stands on? Again, a lot of this part is my own chidushim, so again, take it to whatever extent, but I think it's beautiful and it plugs in beautifully. Alexander the Great was pushing the world stands on wisdom, the world stands on money, the world stands on power. That's what the world stands on. That's what he emphasizing. That was the Greek philosophy, and it was infiltrating to the entire Jewish nation. Comes Shimon HaTzadik, and the Mishnah says, Hu HaYa'imer. What does it mean that Hu HaYa'imer? Hu HaYa'imer says that he was constantly repeating it again and again. He lived by it. He says, you want to know what the world stands on? It doesn't stand on wisdom. It doesn't stand on money. It doesn't stand on power. It stands on three things: on Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chasadim. That's what the world stands on. Now we can better understand of why Shimon HaTzadik, came to this conclusion, came to this, to this focus. The battle between Shimon HaTzadik and Alexander the Great, the philosophical, behind-the-scenes battle, is not something that happened only back then. It's something that happens to this day. Modern science works the same way. Atheism, agnosticism, this all work. If we can't physically see the way that it worked for Alexander the Great, if he was able to justify something, if he was able to understand something, that it made sense. But if I don't understand it, if I don't see it, then it doesn't make sense. He bowed down to Shimon HaTzadik in the story that we said last week, when he saw Shimon HaTzadik, because he saw him in a vision. He was able to attribute, my success is because of Shimon HaTzadik. My success is because of this person. I'm going to grant this person whatever he wants. But it wasn't from a philosophical understanding that there is, that he came to a conclusion that really the Torah is correct and that's what we have to be, focus on. He came from it from what he saw. His perspective was, if I see it, if it makes sense, then I'll go with it. And that's the way that it goes nowadays. If it makes sense, if I can see it, if I can prove it, then fine. Then I'll believe it. Then I'll follow it. And at the same point in time, it's easier to justify something, right? We're easily swayed. Oh, we're so easily swayed. The manipulation. By the way, marketing is another name for manipulation, right? The manipulation that we go through is so if we're just pushed a little bit to one direction, it could be from our own, justification, from our own bias that we want to focus on one direction. We'll just see that one answer. I can't tell you how many times people call me and they ask me questions and I could see they're just guiding me towards answering one way. And they're just want me to answer that question, but they need that justification and be okay, so I spoke to this person, they said it's okay, fine, so now I feel comfortable in doing what I'm doing. So we're very biased in what we do. We push ourselves to one way, and then we justify it. So if we have a mindset of Alexander the Great, that we have to see everything, so then guess what? When we want to do something good, then fine, we'll do it. When we want to do something bad, we'll be able to justify it, we'll be able to prove it, we'll be able to have that similar mindset of Alexander the Great, that if I'm able to see it, if I'm able to explain it, if I'm able to justify it, then it's okay of what I'm doing. And this is where the scientific world comes into such a disaster of where they are. And that is what's scientific if it can be proven. If it can be proven, then it's whether you call it a fact or whatever it is you want to call it. I'll just leave it as a statement of a fact. And if you can't prove it, then it must be not true, to a certain extent. But this is very, very fluid, because when you're dealing with scientific facts, evidence, or theories, it's all based of the criteria, of the scientific advancements, of the tools that we have in our hands. So what was disproven 100 years ago, all of a sudden became proven now. And what's proven now may be disproven in 100 years. It's science is very fluid. It constantly is changing because we're constantly learning new things. And that's why, medication are put on the market, they're taken off of the market. These things are taken out. Things are constantly going back and forth because it's a fluid thing. And we still, to this day, go and say in our mindset, we'll be okay, if science says it, then it must be, the Hard Valley Opera. It must be that we have to go through this direction, even though it's something that's constantly changing. Where Torah, on the other hand, doesn't change. It always stays the same, and it's not being proven wrong consistently. So why is it that you have something very consistent, something very changing, that people are still being fallen prey into the changing aspect? And the answer is, it's Alexander the Great's mindset. Is that if I could prove it, if I want to do something, then I'll focus on this way. So the battle between Alexander the Great, the battle between Shimon HaTzadik still stands till today. The question is, where do you stand? Do you stand to realize that you want to be successful in this life, so you're going to go work hard? Again, you should work hard, you should succeed, but it's all about how much you acquire and how much you're going to be able to, acquire in wisdom, and how much you're going to be able to, of course, I'm talking about secular wisdom, Torah wisdom, you obviously should acquire, and how much you're going to go and you're going to be able to get your strength. Is that the focus? Is that what's going to make you successful? Or are you going to understand and realize that what Shimon HaTzadik was telling us, you know what the world stands on? You know what success is going to be? Al Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Hasadim. You want to succeed in life? You want to succeed? You want to know what the world stands on? Focus on learning Torah. Focus on praying and focus on doing good deeds. That is the recipe of success. I want to finish off with a thought that Rabbi Dr. Avram Twersky brings down on this Mishnah. That you look at today's day and age, the survival of the world, it's in jeopardy. Our technological advances, while they give us many blessings, they unfortunately come at a tremendous cost. Now, when you look at the world at large, with the chemical pollution, with the nuclear waste, with the acid rain, with the carbon dioxide emissions, with the ozone layer, the tampering of the ozone layer, the global warming, and I'm not talking about plastic straws and plastic bags. I'm talking about the real stuff that actually make a difference. That nobody wants to we have to stick with that. What's the reason that there was so much efforts to try to control this, and there's only limited success? And the reason is that people have an insatiable appetite for wealth, for leisure, for greater conveniences, and it's not a hidden fact. It's a very well-known fact that we are going to give the world to our children not the way that we receive the world. It's going in a downward spiral. I'm not talking about in the spiritual aspect. I'm talking about in the physical aspect. And it's all based because we have this insatiable appetite. This insatiable appetite, which was the same appetite that Alexander the Great had. Ezra Usher, because I constantly accomplish, I constantly acquire. Ezra Gibar, I constantly acquire. I'm so wise. Ezra Chacham, I'm always achieving more. He had this insatiable appetite for all his desires. He was a substance abuser. He was constantly going after all these things, and that's one of the reasons that he died. He died from what one opinion is an alcohol overdose, where he just constantly, he had this appetite and he couldn't satiate it. And Rabbi Dr. Twersky explains that humanity is right now addicted to gratifying our desires, just like a drug addict is addicted to their drugs. And the drug addict, is not deterred. It's not going to stray away from the drugs because they know that it's going to destroy them. They don't care that it destroys them. They're not thinking about that. And even if they're aware of it, they're not. No, I've dealt with many drug dealers. I don't know why I said dealers. I meant drug addicts. Dealt with dealers a little bit, but mostly addicts, ex-dealers, I have to say. The cravings of the addict blinds them to the self-destruction that they're going to have. And this is the same state that we are in today. The goal of life has become the pursuit of pleasure, similar to that of a drug addict. And what would be the treatment? And by the way, the reason why specifically it's such a chiddush that it comes from Rabbi Dr. Twersky is that he was a psychiatrist, right? He dealt with drug addicts, and he sees this. And he says, you know what the treatment of an addict? It's when they become aware of their destructive progression, of their addiction, and they change their lifestyle to a greater pursuit of spirituality. Many of us, our desires, our focus in life is about acquiring this physical growth and the physical. Of course, we have amazing, reasoning behind it to give tzedakah, to build that. And again, may HaKadosh Baruch Hu bless us with infinite blessing on it. On all of it, wealth and health and strength and wisdom and all these things. But when the focus becomes only that, it's an addiction. And the way to get out of that addiction is to change that to a greater pursuit of spirituality. And this was Shimon HaTzadik was coming to tell us. He says, you're going to fall into this path. This path over here of constantly straying after what the Greek philosophy is, which still stands till today. But rather, you want to accomplish, you want to acquire, you want to overcome it, you have to go and you have to go through Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Hasadim. That's the way that you're going to succeed, and that's the way that you're going to be able to accomplish, and that's what the world stands on. The Maggid of Vilna says in the Mishnah of Kohan, which Shlomo Melech, the second pasuk in Koheles, where Hevel Avalim Amar Kalas, everything is vanities, vanities of vanities. Hevel Avalim Hakol Hevel, everything is nothing. Talking about Shlomo Melech, who had access to everything. You know what it means? Nothing. Nothing is zero. And if you add a bunch of zeros, it means nothing. That number doesn't accumulate to anything if you add a bunch of zeros. But if you put a 1 in front of these zeros, all of a sudden this becomes a huge number. This becomes a huge number where it was 0 before. All of a sudden it becomes billions, trillions, and so on. When we partake in worldly pleasures, if we're doing it for the wrong sake, if we're not doing it for the right understanding, again, the Torah doesn't say you have to abstain from all these pleasures of the world. The Torah doesn't say that. The Torah says, yes, you could and you should have certain pleasures, and in fact, many pleasures in this world, but you have to do it in the right ways and the right reasoning. If someone has a relationship before they get married, so they're taking this pleasure before they get married. They're taking that and they're putting a bunch of zeros about it. But if they have the relationship after they get married, all of a sudden they're putting that 1 in front of that 0. And all of a sudden now it became from being worthless or even negative to all of a sudden being worth billions, being worth a tremendous amount. So when we partake in our physical desires, are we doing it with a spiritual background or with a spiritual backing? And if so, we place that 1 in front of all that zeros. And all of a sudden, it becomes powerful. You know, the wisdom, the wealth, the strength, all of a sudden it becomes worthwhile. Meaning that Alexander the Great says, you know what succeeds in this world? If you're strong, if you're wealthy, if you're able to go and if you're able to acquire a lot of wisdom. And the Chazal says, no, it's all about Torah, Avot, Gemilas, Hasadim. But what about wealth? What about wisdom? What about power? What about strength? And the answer is that if you acquire wealth for the right reasons, through the right paths, and utilizing the money for the right way, then guess what? You take all that slew of zeros and you put a 1 about, in front of it. All of a sudden, it becomes very powerful, very, very spiritual. You're taking that physical and you're infusing it with spirituality. So when we look at this battle, the battle of Shimon HaTzadik, the battle of Alexander the Great, this is something that continues to today. It's a battle of where our focus will be. The battle of where our mindset is. Is our mindset on Torah, Avot, and Gemilas Hasadim, or our mindset is on the spiritual acquiring of where Alexander the Great? Greek philosophy is no longer standing, even though there is the original mindset is still pushing, but the core of it, the bulk of it, is no longer here. The temptation of it is still here, but the core of it is no longer here. Torah is still here. Torah is here to stay. The question is, which side are you going to focus on? Are you going to focus on the Greek side, or are you going to focus on the spiritual side? With that, we will open up to some questions. We will also, now that we got this, by the way, these 2 classes were just an introduction to the second Mishnah of Pirkei Avos. Now in our coming class, we're going to start to uncover what Shimon HaTzadik meant by Torah, Avot, and Gemilas Hasadim. Okay, question. Why did the Kohanim know to stop using Hashem's name because he passed? If Berkos Kohanim is deraisa, that's a good question of why and how. And they started, I don't know, like if it was Shimon HaTzadik says from now on you stop. All my information that I have it was just stop. It's a great question. If these Kohanim had questionable, next question, if these Kohanim had questionable lineage and most likely non-Jews from what I understand, how are they able to survive coming in and out of Kodesh HaKadoshim? So I'm assuming you're referring to the Kohen Gadolim, the Kohanim Gadolim, which were over 300 during the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, and that is one of the reasons there were so many of them. They didn't survive coming out of Kodesh HaKadoshim. One of the reasons why there was such a high number of it. Oh, I forgot to also, we're learning tonight Leilu Nishmas Avram ben Chaim Yehuda and Yechazkel ben Avraham, and also the Yurtzeit of Zera Shimshon. I forgot. Yeah, you're right. Thank you for for bringing that up. And also the is a Yurtzeit of Tzvi ben Harav Asher. May all the Neshamas have an Aliyah. Okay, next question. Drugs and other addiction is about escapism, running away from something they feel they have no purpose, and when someone is spiritual aware, they feel more accomplished. 100%. Now, it's not the sole, I guess, overcoming of drug addiction, but it does play a very, very important role. When the third Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt, are we going to be on a higher level than the past two Beis Hamikdash? So it's an excellent question. So in a sense, yes, because we are going to be going before the Chet of Adam Arishon. But again, this is going to be a process. So it grows over time. Okay, is that the last question? Oh, yeah. All right. Looks like the last question. Oh, no, we got one more.
I'm going to show you.
Yeah.
Lights Along the Way by Rabbi Twersky.
Okay, I didn't read that one.
He is our Memphis Rabbi Nissan's uncle.
Oh, really?
I got him to take the words, or his Rabbi Twersky's people, take the words out of that picture because I thought it was just so beautiful. And I have it hanging on my wall there.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
I didn't get your message. I messaged you about, well, I guess we're not going to talk about it. And then I sent you something about Alexander the Great. But anyway.
Yeah.
Maybe you didn't push send. It happens.
No. It's weird because it went, but I sent a voice note on messages, so maybe that's why it didn't go through. I don't know.
Oh, I'll look there. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know why. Okay, one last question came in. Can you tell us some things to work on in Elul? So I could just tell you one very important factor, that the way that it works for Rosh Hashanah is the earlier that you start working on yourself, whatever it is that you start preparing yourself for Rosh Hashanah, you're basically getting online for Rosh Hashanah. And you're much better off being in the front of the line of Rosh Hashanah than in the back of the line of Rosh Hashanah. Think of it as like, this is back in the olden days, like a Black Friday, where if you get early enough, you would get the good deal. So whatever it is that you want to work on, and everybody knows what they need to work on. I mean, I could give you a list of things, but I don't know if that's so appropriate because there's so many different things that everyone to their own, to their own level. Whether it's Shmir Sanayim, whether it's Tznius, whether it's Tefillah, whether it's Shabbos, but whatever it is, if you start working on yourself, and put it this way, and if you can't do anything else, at least start davening to work on yourself, meaning that you ask Hashem, please help me, kind of, work on myself. So the earlier that you start, the better judgment that you will have on Rosh Hashanah. Leave you with that gold mine. We gave a whole class on this a few years back, but that's you can't get more powerful than that. I don't know what else I could give you more powerful than that. But in any case, until next time, may you all have an amazing, most successful week, month, and Emeret Hashem signing for an amazing year.
Rabbi, I had a question.
Yes.
It was, I sent it in the group chat, but it was basically, I was talking regarding the cooking, like, Larson, that's what.
Oh, I missed this one, I'm sorry.
Like, married and that became part of the Kohanim, and that they're part of the 300.
No. Okay, so I wasn't clear. Okay, so first of all, I apologize because I missed that question. And secondly, the people that became like Kohanim or whatever was in the Kutim, that was not part of the Beis Hamikdash. That was part of the temple, their temple. Like they went off. That was not part of the 300 that we're referring to over here.
And so they made their own like temple.
And Har Gerizim, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
About the background, like in a coffee shop.
No, it's completely fine. Yeah. All right. Thank you, and thank you for all the kind words. Yes. My wife deserves great thanks for allowing me to do all and anything that I do. So, yes, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Until next time.
Thank you, Rabbi Zitron. Thank you, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.